I know you're all data-driven and all those things. I'd like to ask you to do one thing, not because I'm going to probably wow you, but I'm going to ask you to turn off your electronics for the next 30 minutes. So fold your computers down, because we're going to talk about human beings, and we're going to talk about people, and we're going to talk about DNA. Now, some of you are going to, we have counselors out in the hallway that if some of you can't live a half an hour without, having a screen in front of you, we have, crisis counselors in the back. They can help you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, DNA and how you replicate it. And it sounds really technical, but I think what you're going to find is it's really quite simple. And one of the sequences, the genome sequences we're going to talk about is you as leaders. Because quite honestly, the biggest code of changing DNA and changing sales organizations and developing people are sales leaders. And that's where we're having the biggest problem. So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get started, I'd like to do a DNA experiment with you. And here's the way this is going to work. There are 4 simple little shapes up there. There's a triangle, a square, a Z, and a circle. And each one of those probably jumped out at you pretty quickly. If it hadn't, I'd like you to take 5 seconds and just think about one of those things that best represent your DNA as a leader. Everyone have one? You sure you have one? Okay, now this is the participation part of the program. So when I ask you to raise your hand, that means raise your hand like this, okay? So we can see it. All right, so who picked the triangle? Let's see the triangle. Raise your hands. Raise your hands really high, everyone. Okay, this is Sales 2.0, soon to be 3.0. This is the intelligence of the group. Now, I always ask, raise your hands again, and guess what happens? Twice as many people raise their hands. Every time, twice as many people raise their hands. So let's see the intelligence group one more time. Over the course of the next day and a half, if we have a problem, we can't solve it, these are the people we go to. This is the intelligence of the group. All right. Where are squares? Squares, raise your hand. Let's see the squares. Oh, boy. Comes to DNA, this is the leadership of the group. So we're kind of in trouble because we don't have a lot of leaders, which is maybe okay, maybe not. We're in sales and marketing, and we'll talk about that for a second. But this is the leadership of the group. So we need to find our way to lunch or find our way to the bathroom. Leaders, raise your hand one more time. Let's see them. Raise them proudly. There's a few of you. All right. Now, who are the Zs of our group? Let's see the Zs. All right. This is not surprising. We're in a sales and marketing group, right? These are the innovators. We're near Silicon Valley. Zs tend to be more innovators. Now, why do you think that is? And this is true to life. If you notice, the Z was the only open structure of the 4 I gave you a choice of. The other one was a triangle, square, or circle, closed structures. Zs tend to be an open structure, more interested in things coming in at them. Obviously, being in the West Coast, close to Silicon Valley, we're going to have a little bit more of that. So that's our Zs. And last, but certainly not least, where are circles? Circles, stand up. Stand up, circles. Let's see them. Get a good, these guys get a stretch. Now, we're here for a day and a half. We're having lunch. We're probably going to have dinner. These are the people who are just generally having a good time goofing off. So find a circle. I kind of start with that, hopefully, to get you laughing a little bit. But also, there is a little truth to this. If you start thinking about those 4 structures and you start thinking about DNA, it starts bringing you into a mindset. And when you think about the mindsets that you have as a leader, you think about the mindsets that you have as a sales organization, you think about culture and values, you think about the technology, the data, all those things. Ultimately, until we really figure out artificial intelligence, there has to be a human being behind that in a sales organization. And that human being has to go to your customers and have a way to communicate value, to communicate success, to communicate the relationship. And when we do research, and we're really embarking on a pretty healthy research project that I'm looking forward to hopefully at the next Sales 2.0 to talk a little bit more about, which is mindset, spirituality, mentality, success mentality of salespeople. and how it's changed over the last 10 years. And this is pretty serious research. We're pretty excited about it because we're embarking out with 3 universities. University of Dayton, University of Toledo, and Central Michigan University are providing the brain power. I'm not the brain power behind it. The PhD brain power behind it's going to do this. But what it's done is it started to set the stage for how do we have to have this new world of salespeople. Because the day of going in and presenting a product or a service or having the artificial intelligence, I'm really excited about some of the things Gerhard talked about in terms of artificial intelligence and being able to script to some degree people how they can be more successful with customers. But ultimately it takes a genome sequence number 1 we're going to talk about is how do you have multi-level communication skills? And when you think about our workforce and what we do, and that was one of the reasons I asked you to put your tablets down for a second. Multi-level communication skills means just not your iPhone or your Droid phone or your laptop or your iPad. Those are not multi-level communication skills. It's verbal communication. It's body language. All those things have to come into play. And there was a project that I thought was really interesting, and I'd invite you to go out there and see this. Just take a look at this picture. This is my data sheets. You're going to see all my data sheets are pictures. They have no captions. They have no bits or bytes. What do you see about that picture? Anyone see anything interesting about that picture? What are those 2 people doing? They're looking at their phones. There's a great project out there. This artist went out and took photos and removed the phones from all these photos. And when you start looking at them, they become really scary in terms of how disengaged we became because of technology. This is a couple sharing an intimate moment, right? Looking at their phones. I kind of do this little experiment, and I'd ask you the same thing. Go to a restaurant, watch families at restaurants or couples at restaurants, and see how often they're engaging in conversation or how much are they Facebooking or whatever it is that they're doing. They're like this, and there's no communication. But yet, if you think about the customer world, what has to happen more than anything between customers and the organizations you represent? Your customers and the organizations you represent. What has to happen more than anything? Pardon? You have to engage with them, right? You can have the greatest data in the world, you can have the greatest insights in the world, but if you just send that to them in an email or a tweet or whatever it is you choose to communicate, how much of it really hits? And how much of it's accurate? The answer is 0. It's not the, Steve Carell, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You have very little chance. It becomes like junk mail. Literally, the old-fashioned, in-the-mail type of thing. So as you think about what happens in multi-level communication skills, imagine if this slide was advancing. We'll stay right here. There we go. You think about this. Here's a couple of statistics that kill me. Is on average, people on their mobile phones 2.7 hours a day. That's twice the amount of time they spend eating. So think about that. You're on your phone twice as much as you spend, and we have to eat to survive. It's 1/3 of the time most people spend sleeping. And so when we start thinking about that from a business application perspective, I'm waiting to find the research that says how much of this is spent versus talking. Now, any of those you have younger children under the age of 22, I understood the concept of talking recently. I don't have any kids, but I had the chance to interact with a lot of younger adults recently. Talking means they've actually texted somebody. I was like, wow. Or Snapchatted them. I'm like, that's talking? What happened to the vocal cords moving and someone actually listening? And so what we have to do is kind of think about how do we go back old school a little bit. So all the data, all the information we have becomes simply this. How do we start engaging with people differently? And I mentioned I was in Italy, and I happened to, this is literally a recent picture from Saturday. So this was an edition, or Friday, I'm sorry, from Friday. I was at a little square in Italy, and that little truck you see behind there showed up at this square, and they brought out all these games that required no technology. whatsoever. They're wooden games. And here you see a mother and a daughter interacting using a string, having to move that circle around that little racetrack. What I witnessed for I wound up standing there captivated for 2 hours watching people suddenly interact, which gave me the idea to have you put your phones down for a second, is because what happened is no parents, no people, no one were looking at cell phones. Now, what I didn't realize was this was happening. I would have liked to have taken a picture of this square before this, because guess what I saw? A whole bunch of people looking like this. And I'm always fascinated by, you can tell how old people are because how close they hold their phones. And sadly, I'm becoming one of those people myself where I have to look at a phone like this occasionally. Or it looks like I found the accessibility button, so I am actually handicapped. I guess I fall into that 26% of mental disabilities because I had to increase the size of my type. But yeah, if you look at this, but look at this square. I find it fascinating because this is communication going on in a way between adults, and I saw adults doing this. So I saw 2 adults working together to do some of these things, adults and children. Everyone was really enjoyable in terms of engaged in the process. And I started thinking about this and how much more engaged do we need to be with our customers? Because guess what? This is problem solving at its root element. And what does a sales professional do more than anything at its root element? Problem solve. Problem identify and problem solve. How can I do that? I can only do that through communication. And then here's the whole square. You get a chance to see what it looked like, to see that this was not made up, that the whole thing, it went on like this I was there for 2 hours, and I talked to the people who brought this in, and the local village brought this in, and they bring this in once a month to engage not only tourists, but locals and everyone else. And as I was watching this, I mean, you saw an incredible cross-section happening of language, of interaction, social skills, you name it, and I was just really fascinated by this. So those are my data sets. Now back to our regularly scheduled program being around here, I ask you this simple question. Are these communication skills or are they communication tools? Skills or tools? Tools. A lot of times we confuse these for skills. We think taking a picture is that, that skill. And then I found some other ones when I started looking at, these are the big ones. Obviously Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, LinkedIn, who was here, Pinterest, and then these other ones, which I found interesting. Bark. Anyone ever heard of bark.com? It's a business networking thing that's out there. Lunch Meet. So if you really can't find anyone to have lunch with you, go out to Lunch Meet. And I had to look at that because I actually thought that was like Just for Lunch, which is the dating service. No, this is like dating service for business people. So you can go find somebody to have lunch with. Beyond, Data.com, Connect Summary, all these different things are out there. Well, those are really important, and social selling skills and social networking is really critical. But what it does is it creates the platform for how we deliver interesting tidbits of insight to help us get there. And here's some more information that just came out about how much people use on their desktop versus mobile. So all these things kind of made me start thinking about what is communication. And this is real life. This is a search from my own email, and I didn't put anyone in here. I made sure no one in here is from any of the data companies that might be actually sending me a lot of information, which there are some. And this is Erica Cannon and Derek Landers, who are real people. You can see how much they communicate with me. Now, if you're Erica or Derek, and you're talking to your sales leader right now, what do you think they're saying about Jeff Seeley at crew.com? He's on my list. I'm talking to him, right? Because they're sending me some really interesting emails. Why aren't prospects reading your emails? I don't know, because they don't read yours. Why is new business is your marathon? Please keep us in mind. Leave a message. Thanks. Keep us in mind. Thanks. 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 I don't know what he's thanking me for. I've never read one of his emails. But here's the one that really got me. Hi, Jeff. Just want to check in with you. You might be interested in outsourcing lead generation, sales appointment setting services for business development. What we do is connect a list of your prospects based on your target market criteria via phone, email, pre-qualify interested potential clients, set them either phone or office sales appointments to you, do a formal presentation. And if you want to learn more, I can have one of my marketing consultants call you for a more in-depth discussion. Kindly click here to make an appointment. Best regards, Sally. What that told me was, I do not have the time or interest, but maybe somebody else in my company does, to talk to you. My job is just to send you emails and talk to you. Well, how is this problem solving? How is this creating any kind of a communication skill set? How is this networking? I'm the CEO of our company. They're networked, quote unquote, at the highest levels in their pipeline world. But the reality is, there's no relationship there. There's nothing interesting. They provided me no insight. And I would say the same thing is, what's going on in your organizations? Are your people doing these kinds of things that may not look quite this blatant? But I can tell you, there's a few people in here that they are. And so it becomes, how do you do that? So when you think about how you go to the new genome, it's how do you have these multi-level communication skills? It's not email, it's not Facebook. It's how do you actually get in and create a relationship with somebody that then becomes the basis for how you do business. These just become tools by how to get information out there and market yourself. So that's genome number one. I promise the most important one is genome number two, which is simply this: top performing managers, which is everyone in this room. What is the genome of a top performing manager? And we've done a lot of research on this over the last year or so. And what we find is they understand what motivates their team members. And guess what? It's different for every person. And you start looking at generationally, you look at millennials, you look at Gen X's, Gen Y's, you even get into, even some of us old boomers who are still hanging around. Each one of us are motivated by very different things. So a top performing manager has to understand what motivates their teams. They have a fair but not equal leadership style. And I'll talk about each one of these a little bit more in depth in a second. They redeploy underperforming assets quickly and fairly. The number one complaint of most organizations is you do not take the people who are not performing and move them someplace else. You just live with them. They provide development opportunities, and they have a mindset of success. So let's talk about motivation of team members. Motivation is not, let me get you excited and run through the wall for a moment and figure out why you did it. Motivation is an ongoing thing, and there are things that employees need. Salespeople need. They need rewards, security, recognition, a chance to grow, be part of a team. They need leadership. Our job is to understand as a leader which one of those genomes are the most important to them. Because if it's recognition, what do I have to do? Recognize them. If it's security, what do I have to do? If it's opportunity or flexibility, I have to understand that. And within our culture and our values that was talked about, how do I make that work in an organization, in our organization? That becomes side one. Side two becomes simply this. The company has needs. You have needs as a leader. And what we don't do goes back to genome number one. We have to effectively communicate our expectations. What do we need from a productivity perspective? What do we need from a profitability, sales growth, innovation, insight, loyalty, commitment, teamwork? All those things become really critical to the success of the organization. But what we have to do is communicate those. And we have to communicate those beyond just a really interesting Twitter message or a Snapchat photo or those kinds of things. It's really engaging people. And that's what culture has created. And I think it was the gentleman from LinkedIn talked about culture of LinkedIn. Do you think that LinkedIn culture is communicated via LinkedIn? What did he say? That was really interesting. We talk about it with every person in every meeting, from the CEO on down. That becomes what creates motivation, is engaging people in a way and understanding them to make sure it works. So that's kind of how you motivate team members, or think about it. One of the great quotes I heard a long time ago, and I hate to use a football quote, but Jimmy Johnson once said, one of the players of Jimmy Johnson who coached the Dallas Cowboys once said, the great thing about Jimmy Johnson is he treats everyone fairly but not equally. So what does that mean? What is when you treat people fairly? I'll put it out to you. What does treating people fairly mean? This is the interactive portion of the program. You get to talk now.
According to a set of standards.
According to a set of standards. Thank you, Will. Or, I'm sorry, your Wi-Fi. Ralph, thank you, Ralph. I got the password too, thank you. What else is fair? How else do you look at fair? How you want to be treated. Pardon? The golden rule, thank you. Yes, sir? Responsive. Any others? That side of the room, I don't mean to just ignore you guys. Anything over there? What they earn or what they deserve, okay. Yeah, fairly is treating someone with fairness means that it's not autocratical. We're understanding, so your explanations are very good. What happens when you treat people fairly? They think you're engaged, right? They think you're engaged. Now, what does it mean when what is equal? How many of you have like a President's Club trip or winner's trip or whatever you want to call it for your organizations? A lot of organizations do. Does everyone get to go to that? No. If it were equal, wouldn't everyone go? Right? Hey, y'all were in sales this year. Don't know what your quotas were, don't care. Everyone's going to Cancun. Generally doesn't work that way, does it? So what is equal, and that's where organizations sometimes get confused. It's like we got to treat everyone equally. Well, no, you have to treat your best performers, you have to treat everyone fairly, but not equally. And what that means is you have to recognize the performance and the capabilities of your top people. And you have to have people want to aspire to grow to them. And that's what becomes the next genome of when you get into this, is what people want to do is have something to be aspirational to. Help me get to my next level. And that's what a great manager does, because here's one of the crazy things. And I promise not to talk a bunch about millennials, because a lot of you are in this room, and I'm not one, although I did take a test on the flight over here that I am a considered a millennial want-to-be. I was pretty proud of that. I had Wi-Fi access, so I was coming over, flying from Munich back to Detroit, and so I was kind of bored, so I was doing some research for something. And they have a millennial test you can take, and I was pretty proud of the fact I scored a 95 out of 100. I'm not quite sure how I did that, but I'm a millennial wannabe. But here's something about millennials, and a lot of people in general, is they'll tell you they know it all. People, your sales team, I know this. I know how to communicate. I know how to understand customer needs. I know how to proactively problem solve. I will tell you I know all that. But what I won't tell you is I really don't know how, because it makes me feel inferior. It makes me feel difficult. So if I don't sit down as a good leader and understand and engage with people, how do I know what they don't know? I can't guess. And one of the critical things of organizations that we've seen over the years is, I like to consider some organizations that a lot of times I walk in and people will say, well, our organization, all of our people are really smart. We're smarter than most organizations. Our people really get it. So if it was going to only take somebody 2 days to learn something, our people can learn it in 2 hours. The reality is that's just not true in anything. If I'm really smart, can I become a doctor in less than probably 5 or 6 years? Probably not. Would I want to go to the doctor who went through med school in a year? Yeah, not really, right? Or if I was going to have an operation, would I want the cardiologist who went through the, kind of evening program at Lincoln Tech, would I want them to be my cardiologist? No. Would I want my lawyer to be this way? Would my CPA to be this way? Sales professionals are at the exact same quality. Sales leaders are at the exact same quality of those professions I talked about. The sad thing is we don't treat ourselves that way. So how do we do that? Is we have to develop people in a way that is impactful. And if you remember nothing about what I've talked about over the course of the last 20 minutes here or so, is what I want you to understand is one thing. As a leader, telling is not development. Telling somebody to do something, how to do it, why to do it, is not development. And more leaders tell people what to do and then walk away and hope they figured it out. What development is they want to learn things at their new pace. I need experiences. I need experiential learning. I need to get it. I need to understand. I need to feel it viscerally. I don't have patience to learn, but I know I need to. And how am I recognized and rewarded for this development? That becomes critical pieces of sales leaders, of how do I do that? And then lastly, as a sales leader, it's about mindset. Gerhard talked an awful lot about this, no limits thinking. But what is a success mindset for leaders? And as a leader, it's engaging people in a way to get more out of them than they thought they could get out of themselves. That's what a great leader does. Now, that could be also said from 1972, when a lot of you weren't even born. But the reality is the human being, the human spirit has not changed in any way, shape, or form. Great success helps me see things that are possible. And then how do I apply this to your team and why? So how do I open their minds to be thinking about things like no-limit opportunities? How do I get them to think like that 82-year-old guy running the Ironman and thinking, I'm going to be doing this for 16 hours? And obviously he was well prepared because he had the little light things already ready to go. So when he left on the run, he knew he was going to be in the dark. So it's that kind of mindset that becomes creative in terms of how you engage people to do that. And then lastly, the last genome I'm going to talk about is how do you proactively problem solve? And this is the big one. Sales professionals are going to migrate away from, I've got a product, a service, I got something to give you to show you, I'm in search of the problem, to going into organizations, using those communication skills, having the leadership capability, and going in and proactively understanding the customer's issues. What is the number one scarcity in resources in organizations right now? Time. Thank you, Ralph. What else? Leadership. What else? Talent. Right. Talent. If I think back to, we've got a couple organizations that we work with that do everything from really sophisticated things to something as simple as brown boxes and packaging. And if you think about brown boxes and packaging, you think, wow, if I had to sell that stuff sitting here in Silicon Valley, I'd be bored to death. Well, the reality is, you think about the technology required in packaging right now, with what's going on with Amazon, all these different things, everything that's being shipped, the whole displacement of the retail industry, how important is packaging to that customer? Unbelievably, right? They want your stuff to show up, not broken, looking nice. I always joke, if you walked in and bought a Louis, how many of you ladies or men bought something from Louis Vuitton? Anyone ever buy anything from Louis Vuitton? What do you think of the box the Louis Vuitton purse comes in or anything? It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, if that thing just showed up in a brown paper bag, how impressed would you be with your $2,000 purse? Not very. Well, guess what? Our packaging experts have to create that same experience when it shows up in the mail, because it's got to show up in the brown box to go through UPS or FedEx or whatever. But when you open that box, what do you want to see? You don't want to see your stuff scattered all over the place, or your nice piece of electronics or vase or whatever it is you bought broken or smashed. So what do you think they have for expertise? Packaging experts, right? What do you think Amazon has an expertise in? Not packaging. So you think about your customers. How do you proactively get in, whether it's you're trying to sell data mindsets or whatever you're trying to sell, how do you engage your customer? Because what do you have that they don't have? An expertise in your business. Because they don't have the time nor the talent, as Ralph had said, about how to engage people. So we have to proactively problem solve and help them understand their problems. This is a picture from that thing as well, and as you can see, this person's marketing right now via Twitter. It's working really well. Hot day, large numbers of people wanting ice cream. So think about that a second, because here's what, I use a simple image this way. I remember the days when the truck used to drive around and try to find customers. Now the truck doesn't drive around, it tries to influence customers to drive to them. Well, what's happening in our the same thing is happening in our sales organizations and with our people if we don't start changing their mindset of, We have to go to where the customers are. We have to go where the problems are, which is having a relationship and engaging with people to proactively problem solve those situations. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself this: does your sales team problem solve? And what that means is, do they go out and understand and problem solve a problem? Not do they sell your stuff, but do they problem solve? Very different skill set. Who discovers the problems? If you start thinking about your sales team right now, how often do they go to the customer with a problem to help make the customer experience better, to engage the customer in a way that makes more sense? Or how often does the customer come to them with, hey, we're looking for a new CRM system, or we're looking for a new this? How often are they engaging, and who's the instigator of the problem discovery? How deep are their relationships? And what is your position? And that's the last thing I'm going to talk about, because understanding the position of your customer, having multi-layered relationships, and having advocates is the way you start delivering insight, and each of you have insight. So let's talk about what position means. And position is simply this: the current status or degree of influence you have with a customer. And most of us, if you think back to when we're using social networking, all that stuff, are in uncertain position. We're on the outside looking in. We don't have a lot of customer contacts. We haven't used LinkedIn. We haven't engaged our way in any way, shape, or form. If we're in that uncertain position, how often can we proactively problem solve? 0.0. That's my data. Whoops. 0.0. Peripheral is those we have customers, we're getting some business, and we're trying to figure out how to do it. Ultimately, what we want to do is figure out how to get to this last piece, which is, how do we get to preferred position? And it's getting the business, it's all these other things, but it's more importantly of, I have a significant influence in uncovering and discovering sales problems. Not sales problems of mine, but problems of yours, depending on what my solution is. Ultimately, that's having position. And you have position at multi-level layers. So if you think about executives, competitors, their business drivers, their culture, their decision systems, all those things have to be part of how you proactively problem solve. And that's ultimately where you get to insight, which is creating strategic advantage for your customers and creating a better customer experience for your customer's customer. Because that's what drives revenue. It's not you driving revenue to your customer, it's how you help your customer drive more revenue for themselves. Ultimately, these simple three things that we talked about: multi-level communications, the top-performing leadership, which is you, and how do we proactively problem solve. When you start putting these three things into play, all of a sudden you now have the DNA of the sales rep of the future, which is different than the sales rep of the past. The sales rep of the past understood product services and could go out and sell them. Now they have to have a business acumen that is unsurpassed outside of anyone in the organization. They don't need a financial expertise, they have to have financial knowledge. They don't have to have an engineering expertise, they have to have an engineering knowledge. They don't have to have a marketing knowledge or a strategy. Now they have to have knowledge. And that's where the new DNA goes. So with that, I'll leave you with this last piece of information. DNA of top-performing sales reps is the ability to use and merge technological support, technological advances, all those things with the human skills required for human interaction and problem solving. That's the new DNA. It can be developed. It takes a different sequence. It takes a different way to look at things. And most importantly, each of you have the responsibility to do that. It's not the sales team, it's you as leaders. Thank you very much. I'm standing between you and lunch. There you go, Alice.